All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Krishna Vishnu Bhutale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityananda Saraswati Devi Navadipachayane, Nirvishesha Shadnadi Paschadadi Chatarane. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, The Creation, Chapter 9, The Passing Away of Bhishmadev in the Presence of Lord Krishna, Text 9. Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya vasutamaha pujayam asadharma gyo deshakala vibhagavit. Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya vasutamaha pujayam asadharma gyo deshakala vibhagavit. Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya vasutamaha pujayam asadharma gyo deshakala vibhagavit. Everyone chant, please.
Hare Krishna. Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya vasutamaha pujayam asadharmagyo deshakala vibhagavit.
Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya usuttama pujayam asadharmajño deshakala vibhagavat.
Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya vasuttama pujayam asadharmajño deshakala vibhagavat.
Hare Krishna. Tan sametan mahabhagan upalabhya vasuttamaha pujayam asadharmagyo deshakala vibhagavit. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else? Word for word translation. Tan, all of them. Sametan, assembled together. Mahabhagan, all greatly powerful. Upalabhya, having received. Vasu Uttama, the best among the Vasus, Bhishmadev. Pujayam Asa, welcomed. Dharmagya, one who knows religious principles. Desha, place. Kala, time. Vibhagavit, one who knows the adjustment of place and time. Translation. Oops. Translation. The sons of Maharaj Pandu, oops, I'm sorry, turned 2 pages by accident. Bhishmadev, who is the best amongst the 8 Vasus, received and welcomed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly all the religious principles according to time and place. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Expert religionists know perfectly well how to adjust religious principles in terms of time and place. All the great acharyas or religious preachers or reformers of the world executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world. And if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of the time and place. Bhishma Dev was one of the 12 great authorities in preaching this cult of devotional service. And therefore, he could receive and welcome all the powerful sages assembled there at his deathbed from all parts of the universe. He was certainly unable at that time to welcome and receive them physically because he was neither at his home nor in a normal, healthy condition. But he was quite fit by the activities of his sound mind, and therefore he could utter sweet words with hearty expressions, and all of them were well received. One can perform one's duty by physical work, by mind, and by words. And he knew well how to utilize them in the proper place, and therefore there was no difficulty for him to receive them, although physically unfit. Tan Mahitan Mahabhagan Upalabhya Vasutamaha Pujayam Asadharmagyo Deshakala Vibhagavit. Bhishma Dev, who was the best among the 8 Vasus, received and welcomed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly all the religious principles according to time and place. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Kauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanivadi Paschata Deshatarine. Hare Krishna. Continuing with the passing of Bhishma Dev and the instructions of Bhishma Dev. When it was heard what was happening, that Bhishma Dev was getting ready to leave, all the big sages and great souls and rishis and from all over the universe came to hear him. And specifically, Krishna brought Yudhishthira and the Pandavas to hear his instructions at the very end. We heard how Yudhishthira was unsatisfied by the preachings of all the rishis and sages, and even the preaching of Krishna himself, and even the encouragement of his brothers. He was unsatisfied. So this is Krishna's plan to pacify the mind of Yudhishthira and enable him to perform his duties according to time, place, and circumstance by hearing from the great Bhishma Dev. In this verse, Bhishma Dev is called Vasutama, the best of all the Vasus. I think this was discussed earlier in the week, but I'll just very briefly tell the story that the Vasus are a particular class of demigods. There's different types of demigods. You know, there's the functional devas, and there's the Vidyadharas and the Charanas and the Apsaras, so many different types of demigods. And one of these class of demigods are the Vasus. Sometimes they're described as assistants of Indra. Sometimes they're described as assistants of Lord Vishnu. And sometimes they're described as representing the different elements or different functions of the material world. But in any case, they're powerful demigods, and there's 8 of them, brothers. So one time, these 8 brothers, along with their wives, were having a nice day in the forest, a picnic in the forest for enjoyment. And while they were there, this very beautiful cow walked by. It was a Kamadhenu. And the wives of one of the Vasus saw that Kamadhenu and said, "Oh, please get that wish-fulfilling cow for me." And maybe they were a little reluctant. They said, "Well, you know, it obviously belongs to someone. We just can't take it." But the Lord said, "Oh, just get it for me. Just steal it, whatever your powerful demigod. Steal this beautiful wish-fulfilling cow for me." And they did. And it turned out that that wish-fulfilling cow belonged to the sage Vashishta. Vashishta Muni. And because it's Vashishta Muni's cow, maybe that's even the same cow that caused the whole hullabaloo with, what's his name? Vishwamitra, who also was lusting after the wish-fulfilling cow of Vishwamitra, of Vashishta. But in any case, they stole that cow. It belonged to Vishwamitra. He became angry and he cursed them that you'll have to take birth in the lower material planets as your punishment. And they begged and pleaded for some mercy. And he said, well, okay, of you 8 brothers, 7 of you will take birth in the lower planets, but very quickly, almost immediately, you'll leave that life and you'll return to the heavenly planets. But one of you, the chief brother amongst all of you, because someone has to take responsibility, you're the chief brother of the 8 Vasus, you will have to remain in that earth, on that earthly plane, that earthly planet, and you'll have to live a full, long life there as punishment. You're taking, in essence, you're taking the punishment for all of your brothers. So that one Vasu, Jew was his name, who received the punishment of a long life, that was Bhishma Dev. And we know the story. Shantanu met Ganga Devi, the goddess of the Ganges River, on the bank of the river, and fell in love with her and wanted to marry her and have a family with her. And she said, yes, but whatever I do, you cannot question anything I do. So they lived as husband and wife. She got pregnant, she had a child, and she immediately killed that child. And then she did it again. And then she did it again and again. 7 times the child was born and the child was killed. And because he had taken that vow that he couldn't speak up, he couldn't question her activities, although it was breaking his heart. And of course, those 7 children who were born and died were the 7 of the 8 Vasus who took birth on the earthly plane and then immediately returned to the heavenly planets. And then the 8th child, he couldn't take it any longer, Shantanu. And he said, please stop it. What are you doing? You're so cruel. You're killing the children. And she said, I told you not to question me. Now, because you questioned me, we're done as husband and wife. And she took that child and brought him and left and took him to the heavenly planets, where he was educated by all of the great sages, Brihaspati, and all the sages of the heavenly planets. And that's Bhishma Dev. So that's and therefore he's Vasutama, the greatest of all the Vasus. And he's the greatest of all the Vasus and the most learned person being educated in the heavenly planets. We know that everything is superior there, the intelligence, the beauty, the lifespan, all of these things. So Bhishma Dev partook of that great education. And by his nature and his character, he is the most respected and most learned person. Therefore, Krishna took Yudhishthira to hear from him. And all the sages, all the great sages of the universe came to hear from him. He was so qualified that even all the great sages of the universe were willing and eager to hear from him. And he was respected by all of them. And in turn, he, according to his limited position, lying on a bed of arrows on the battlefield with no facility, to the best of his ability with his mind and words, he respected and offered respects and offered greetings to all of them. But in any case, everyone in the universe respected him as the topmost authority. Swayambhu Narada Shambhu Kumara Kapilo Manu Prahlada Janaka Bhishma Bali Vyasaki Vayam. That Bhishma Dev is one of the great authorities. And why? It's not just official. He's not just rubber stamped as an authority, but he actually has the quality of authority. The verse says, Puja Amasha Dharma Gya. He's Dharma Gya. He's an authority because he knows all of the principles of religion. He understands Dharma, whether you translate Dharma as religion, or the duties for all living beings, or Dharma as the essential quality of the living being as being the eternal servant of the Lord. In all these cases, he knew he's Dharma Gya. He understands Dharma. He knows Dharma. And not just know it theoretically, not just book knowledge, but Desha Kala Vibhagavit. Desha means place, Kala means time, And vibhaga means in all different categories, in all different distinctions and categories and classifications. And vit means knowledge or knower. So he's the knower of religion, not just theoretically, but in all kinds of practical circumstances. Desha kala vibhaga vit. That's what makes him qualified as a Mahajan, as a great authority in devotional service. Someone could know something theoretically, and that's good, and that's a foundation, but that's not everything. And sometimes those who are thinking that they know something or claiming that they know something actually don't. Prabhupada told a humorous story once that this is in an old essay he wrote for the short-lived Bhagavat Patrika magazine. He tried, and he wrote an essay, and then he told this story that there was a great scholar, so-called great scholar, and he said, I have studied Ramayana for 50 years, and I have read it forwards, and I've read it backwards, and I've read it sideways, and I've memorized every verse and pondered over the deep meaning of the Ramayana for years and years. And after all of my years of study and memorization and understanding, I just have one question. Who is Sita the father of? So this is the story that he studied so much, but he's thinking, oh, Sita is someone's father? Who is this Sita? So reading the Ramayana and not understanding who Sita is, this is the pitfall of the superficial knowledge, or the book knowledge without guidance, and the book knowledge without practical understanding, without deep realized understanding. Because as Prabhupada has explained many times, just book knowledge, just theoretical knowledge is not enough. You need kaladesha vibhagavit, or as Prabhupada would very often explain it, there's jnana and there's vijnana. These are very interesting words. Jnana means knowledge. Vijnana, vi, the Sanskrit prefix vi, is an intensifier. So there's knowledge and like knowledge in capital letters, knowledge. Vijnana means deep knowledge, realized knowledge, or practical knowledge. And he explained it, and he translated these words in different ways in different times. He would say theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge, or book knowledge and realized knowledge. Just like in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 4, text 31, Krishna explains that you have to destroy lust, the great symbol of sin, because this lust is jnana, vijnana, nashanam. It destroys both jnana and vijnana. And in the word-for-word translation, Prabhupada translates jnana and vijnana as knowledge and scientific knowledge. And in the actual running translation, he calls it knowledge and spiritual realization. So theoretical knowledge and realization, these are very important ideas. In the purport to that Bhagavad Gita verse, he writes, jnana refers to knowledge of self as distinguished from non-self. Or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. So this is basic. We're not this body. This is jnana. Vijnana refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the supreme soul. So this is another nice analysis of jnana and vijnana. Jnana means the realization common to all spiritualists that we're not this body. Even the impersonalists understand this. But vijnana means adding the realization that we're part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Again, Prabhupada writes, specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the Supreme Soul. So if you think you're not this body, but don't understand your relationship with Krishna, this is jnana, not vijnana, and your realization is incomplete. And then in that purport, he also quotes Bhagavatam 2:9-31. Jnanam parama bhuyam me yad vijnana samanvitam sarahasyam tarangam cha grihana gaditam maya. This is Krishna instructing Lord Brahma. And it says, the personality of Godhead said, Knowledge about me, as described in the scriptures, is very confidential. This is Jnanam Paramaguyam. Knowledge about Krishna is very confidential, as described in the scriptures. And it has to be realized in conjunction with devotional service, Yad Vijnana Samanvitam. The necessary paraphernalia for that process is being explained by you. You may take it up carefully. So this is the real bottom line, that there's theoretical knowledge, but realization, as Prabhupada is explicitly saying, and Krishna is explicitly saying in that verse, realized knowledge means that you're actually engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is realized knowledge, practical knowledge, not just armchair philosophy. So this is his conclusion about Jnana and Vijnana. And this is Bhishmadev's realization. Now, as soon as we transfer or change or move from theoretical knowledge, in English we say armchair philosophy, like I'm right now, I'm doing that right now. I'm sitting in an armchair. This is my little pseudo Vyasasan, this comfortable armchair, and I'm philosophizing. So this is armchair philosophy. But as soon as you bring it into practical engagement, into the real world, as soon as you do that, immediately you are forced to consider Kala Desha Patra, time, place, and circumstance. And if you're not Kala Desha Vibhagavit, then you will find many faults in your attempts to practically engage in this great theoretical philosophy. As soon as you want to do that, bring it into the real world, you'll find all sorts of challenges. So this is the one of the great gifts of a great Acharya like Bhishmadev or a great Acharya like Srila Prabhupada, that they know how to translate this philosophy into practical action that everyone can engage in, whether in India, America, Africa, Australia, Asia, it doesn't matter, because he makes it practical. Here's another point that in relation to this, Prabhupada explains in Nectar of Devotion. He says, this is in the beginning of chapter 6, describing the different items of devotional service, beginning with acceptance of a guru. And Prabhupada writes, the purport of this statement is that Srila Rupa Goswami proposes to mention only basic principles, not details. For example, a basic principle is that one has to accept a spiritual master. Exactly how one follows the instructions of the spiritual master is considered a detail. For example, if one is following the instruction of his spiritual master, and that instruction is different from the instructions of another spiritual master, that is called detailed information. But the basic principle of acceptance of a spiritual master is good everywhere, although the details may be different. So this is an important part of Kala Desha Vibhagavit, means that there are adjustments, that instructions may differ from different spiritual masters or from the same spiritual master at different time and places. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed some of his disciples, you accept the order of sannyas, you become renunciate. And like when Raghunath Das, when he saw the renunciation of Raghunath Das Goswami, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so pleased with him that his vows and his austerities were so deep and so firm. It's described that they were like lines engraved in stone, that austerity and that simplicity and that renunciation. And other disciples, he would say, you live with your wife and you raise your children and you do your business and you have your family life and you push on the Sankirtan movement like that. And one is not better than the other, but according to time and place and circumstances, he gave different instructions. So the instruction, the principle is that we are followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the details is that one may be a sannyasi, one may be a householder, one may preach in this way, one may preach in that way. So these are the details. And Kala Desha Vibhagavit means understanding what are the principles and what are the details. Some other, just a couple of other references on this point. This is again from an old BTG article. I have a lot of these old BTGs and old essay references because I've been reading these by Prabhupada lately. So this is a 1956 BTG article. He writes, the details of the main principles may sometimes differ as set by different acharyas, but the main principles as they are do not differ. In the details of such activities, there may appear some different formularies or formalities, but the main principles of devotional worship, called by the name Archan, are all the same everywhere. The principles of accepting initiation from a bona fide spiritual master, the first thing in the matter of devotional service, is always the same. So in his Nectar of Devotion book, he's echoing this principle that he was also explaining in 1956. Then in 1973, he wrote a letter to his disciple Amarendra. And he said, so if you study my books very carefully, then I am sure you will find out the means for applying this Krishna consciousness philosophy in all spheres of life. Now, this is interesting because he's putting this responsibility of understanding Kaladesha Vibhagavat on his disciple. He's saying, if you study the books carefully, you will understand how to apply it practically. There is no limitation, simply it requires a little common sense practically. The main point is that Krishna is the center of all activities, whatever is going on. Whatever the activity may be, if Krishna is at the center, that is all right. The details simply require a little common sense. So you are there in Dallas, and you have all the details of the situation. So now with the help of your godbrothers there, you decide exactly how to execute the thing. After all, the result is given by Krishna. So the main point is simply to execute everything with complete sincerity and enthusiasm without deviating from the principles that I have given you in my books. So if we actually understand and deeply practice and study what the actual principles of devotional service are, as Prabhupada says, if Krishna is at the center, then everything else is all right. Then if we do that, and then with a little common sense, with a little study of the current situation, and as Prabhupada also says, with the help of your god brothers and god sisters, then with a little common sense, you'll understand how to execute everything nicely. So this is the thing, understanding what is the principle, what are principles that must be preserved, and what are details that must be adjusted. Or another way of phrasing it is how restrictive we are about what are principles and what are details. We could take a very broad view, like Prabhupada said, if Krishna is at the center, that's the principle, that's our principle. And if Krishna is at the center, then everything else is all right. Or we might say, our principle, the main principle, the inflexible principle, is that we must engage in the devotional service of Krishna. And that is certainly true. But then if we look at the practice of devotional service, there's Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dastam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. There's so many processes of devotional service to engage in. So many facets. So is it a detail that we select which one? The principle is engage in devotional service. So we could say, oh, it's a detail whether you do Shravanam or Kirtanam or Vishnu Smaranam. Just like, what's that? Shravane Parikshit Abhavad Vyasaki Kirtane. I don't remember the whole verse, but it says that Parikshit Maharaj became perfect just by Shravanam. And Vyasaki, Shukadev, became perfect. He's called Vyasaki, the son of Vyas, became perfect just by Kirtanam. What's that? Yesterday's verse. Let me just look that up quickly. Oh, yeah. In yesterday's purport, Prabhupada said Shukadev is known by different names like Araneya, Aruni Sutta, Vyasaki, and Vyasatmaja. So Vyasaki became perfect just by Kirtan. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. Who was it? Prahlad, I think, became perfect by Vishnu Smaranam. Shravanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Archanam, Padasevanam. All of these have specific acharyas. Akrura became perfect just by offering prayers. So all of these are there. So are these details or principles. As followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we might say that, okay, devotional service is a principle, but Shravanam Kirtanam is also a principle. What's a more basic principle than engaging in the Sankirtan movement? It's called the Sankirtan movement. So engaging in Kirtan is also a principle. So we might say, oh, okay, the principle is hearing and chanting the holy name is the basic principle, and everything else is a detail. Let's see. Or then someone might, in return, someone might quote Bhagavad Gita. Anta kale chama meva smaran mukva kalevaram ya prayati samad bhavam yati nastyatra samtaya. And say, oh, Shravanam Kirtanam isn't a principle, but remembering Krishna at the time of death, that's the principle. And you could even argue that if you're chanting, if you're engaged in Kirtan, but your mind isn't fixed on Krishna at the time of death, then what's the use of your hearing and chanting? The real thing is to fix your mind on Krishna at the time of death. So anyway, without beating this dead horse any longer, the point is that there can be discussion about what is principle and what is detail, according to again, Kaladesha Vibhagavit. We can understand that these things can be understood in different ways. What is principle and what is detail? And this is important. We have to know the theory. We have to know perfectly the actual philosophy, and we have to know how to practice it. Or some might say, oh, we just need philosophy, but there's so many other things in ISKCON or in Krishna consciousness that are not this direct philosophy, and we don't need it. Some people are discussing about how much ISKCON should be associated with Indian culture or with Hinduism or Hindu culture. So this is a worthwhile discussion to have, and I'm not going to answer it because I don't have an answer, but it's a discussion, what's principle and what's detail. One thing to help understanding it, Prabhupada writes in the preface of Srimad Bhagavatam, he wrote, there is need of a clue as to how humanity can become one in peace, friendship, and prosperity with a common cause. Srimad Bhagavatam will fill this need, for it is a cultural presentation for the re-spiritualization of the entire human society. Now, his saying that it's a cultural presentation suggests that it's not just philosophical principles, that there's a culture. Culture means everything that we do in our life is part of our culture. And Krishna consciousness has this very broad, embracing culture with so many facets to it that we adopt. And some of these things, someone might say, oh, they're Indian or they're Hindu or they're not necessary. And at the same time, it's part of a culture that Prabhupada introduced and expected us to pursue, at least to some degree. So again, there's a discussion, what's principle and what's detail. Like, for example, the matter of dress. I don't think anyone is foolish enough to claim that the only way you could go back to Godhead is by wearing dhoti and sari, and that if you wear pants and shirt or dress, that you can't go back to Godhead. I don't think anyone would say that, but there can be discussion. How important is this wearing dhoti and sari? And people bring up different historical things. Is it Vedic? Is it this? Is it that? So it's not necessary in one sense. What's necessary is surrender to Krishna, chanting Hare Krishna, and that can be done in any situation, in any dress, in any country, in any lifestyle. But on the other hand, Prabhupada also wrote, he said, in my opinion, clean-shaved brahmacharis and grihastas in saffron robes look like angels from Vaikuntha. Translation of prayers into English is good. And if somebody dresses like nice American gentlemen without any robes, I have no objection. But every one of my disciples must have flag. By flag, is what he used to call Sika. Must have flag and marks of tilak on forehead. This is essential. So Prabhupada saying that the dress is not essential or not a principle, but the Sika and Tilak mark is a principle, is essential, at least in this letter. Besides that, nobody should do anything without my sanction. I am very sorry to hear that. I won't name the person, but those who know ISKCON history will know who it is. Prabhupada said, I am very sorry to hear XYZ devotee, without doing anything practical, changes his ideas constantly. He was the first man in our society to take the robes, shave cleanly, and take flag, and now he is changing his position. You have asked me to tell you whether you are right or to carry on by following the foolish advice of XYZ devotee. And I say straight that XYZ devotee is wrong, and you are right when you say that the movement will come to nothing if I am not satisfied with your actions. You have written to say that a devotee can do anything for Lord Krishna. That is right, provided such action is sanctioned directly by Krishna or his bona fide representatives. So this is the tension in understanding principles and details, and understanding and being Kaladesha Vibhagavit, that we have to have a very excellent understanding of the philosophy, and we also have to be very rigid followers of our spiritual master. So in one sense, how you dress is insignificant, not directly related to devotional service. But at the other hand, Prabhupada was obviously so pleased to see devotees in dhotis and devotees in saris. He specifically commented that women look especially beautiful and feminine in saris. And he was so pleased to see that, and shaved head and tilak and all of these aspects of quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, Indian culture or Hindu culture or Vedic culture. He was very pleased by that, and we want to please Srila Prabhupada. Or another example is diet. We don't go back to Godhead by eating rice dal and chapatis instead of pasta or peanut butter sandwiches or whatever. That's not how we go back to Godhead. But the Indian vegetarian diet is amazing. I'm presuming everyone has heard of famous author and writer and cook and travel authority, Anthony Bourdain. Has everyone heard of Anthony Bourdain? He is a very famous and very colorful character. And he was also a big malecha, big meat eater. And not only a meat eater, but he was interested in eating like, not just meat, but eating like disgusting meat, like disgusting things. He was very fond of eating, and he had no affection for vegetarianism, whatever. But he himself said that I could be a vegetarian if I was living in India, because there they actually understand how to cook vegetarian in such a way that you're completely satisfied. So even materially, if you don't want to adopt so-called Indian culture or whatever, but if you want to be a vegetarian, if you want to follow the rules of what's proper prasadam, the Indian culture and Indian culinary tradition, it's the only world tradition that has thousands of years of developing cooking skills strictly for vegetarian diet. So what could be more perfect than adopting that if one is going to be a vegetarian? We all like to have a bowl of pasta every now and then. We all like to have some pizza or a veggie burger or whatever thing every now and then. And that's all right, as long as it's pure sattvic, made at home, not too much store-bought or artificially manufactured things. Those things are okay. And there's not necessarily any great harm to our devotional service, but embracing this culture of Indian cooking is such a natural thing. And there's no one who doesn't love a beautifully cooked Indian vegetarian meal. The biggest meat eaters, like this Anthony Bourdain, appreciates it. And Prabhupada loves it. If we're cooking for Srila Prabhupada, he loved these things. He would say, one time he said, when he was eating lunch and the devotee was bringing in hot chapatis, actually when the devotees, they were cooking for Prabhupada, he would eat and he would have one chapati, and when he'd finish the chapati, the devotee would immediately in the kitchen roll it out and cook it. And in a few seconds, it would puff up. And while it was puffed up, he would grab it with the tongs and run it out to Srila Prabhupada and put it on his plate. And Prabhupada would take the chapati and he would poke it with his finger to still puffed up chapati, and poke it with his finger, and a big puff of steam would come out, and he would love that and appreciate that so much. And one time he said, I don't see, when there's fresh, hot buttered chapatis, I don't see how you Westerners can enjoy this dry bread. So I like dry bread sometimes. I bake a lot actually. But the sweetness and the amazing quality of a fresh hot chapati and Indian cooking is a beautiful thing. And Prabhupada loves it, and everyone loves it. You can't find a person who doesn't like it, well done Indian cooking. And Krishna likes it. We read the descriptions of Krishna's pastimes, and if we're making the things that Krishna is liking and Krishna is eating, as described in the scriptures, what a beautiful dovetailing there of culture and philosophy and devotional service. So anyway, we don't want to be like fanatics that, oh, if you eat a peanut butter sandwich instead of rice dal and chapati, there's a special hellish planet, designated for you after you die. That's not the case. But these things are beautiful parts of Krishna conscious culture that we can engage in. And this is the melding of the principles and details. And there are exceptions, just like a nice early story back on 26 2nd Avenue. One devotee, I can't remember, maybe it was Janaki, I'm not sure, was in the kitchen cooking, and she was making whipped cream. And in India, there's no whipped cream. Maybe there is today. You could find anything in India nowadays, but at that time there was no whipped cream. Prabhupada didn't know what it was, and he saw her making whipped cream. And my personal opinion, whipped cream is one of the most delicious foods known to mankind. But aside from that, Prabhupada saw her making whipped cream, and Prabhupada said, oh, what is that? And she explained, oh, it's whipped cream. You take cream and you add sugar and you whip it and you beat it, and it becomes thick and creamy and full of air and becomes puffed up like that into this beautiful cream. And Prabhupada, he dipped his finger into the bowl of whipped cream and scooped some out with his finger and tasted it. And he said, oh, sorry, I'm laughing just remembering it. And Prabhupada goes, oh, this is very nice yogurt. And Janaki says, oh, Prabhupada, it's not yogurt, it's whipped cream. And she explained again. And then he dipped his finger in again and tasted it again. He said, yes, this is very nice yogurt. And Janaki chastised Prabhupada lightly. He said, oh, Prabhupada, I thought you're not supposed to eat in the kitchen. And we said, oh, that's all right. So Prabhupada was, bending these details a little bit to relish some delicious whipped cream. But the whole point is that if we're very firmly based in the philosophy, and if we're actually following in the footsteps of our spiritual master, then, as I quoted in that earlier letter from Srila Prabhupada, with a little common sense, with a little knowledge of the situation, and with the advice and guidance of our God brothers and our spiritual master, we'll understand how to adjust things. In one letter, Prabhupada said, if we simply repeat this philosophy exactly as it is, without any misrepresentation or adulteration, then this movement will never be checked and we will conquer the world. So we make the philosophy the immutable foundation, and as far as possible, we keep the principles and details that Srila Prabhupada gave us, be very cautious about changing them, and maybe make some minor adjustments here and there. Prabhupada would very often comment about the dangers of change. He would say, it is changing things. This is your Western or your American disease, that you always want to change things. He said, don't change anything. So very rarely do we actually have to change anything of significance in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada was very intelligent. He knew how to adjust things. He knew how to preserve things, and where to change things. And he changed actually very little, but he did make some changes. Let's see. there's a great letter from Srila Prabhupada to Himavati. Unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me, but he wrote in that letter, he said that in previous years, in previous ages, the men would preach and practice and travel and spread Krishna consciousness, and the women would stay at home and maintain the household, because that was the culture, the Indian culture and the Brahminical culture at that time. And then he said, but now I have made a great innovation that the women, the devotees, they can also go out and preach exactly like their god brothers, and go out and preach and spread Krishna consciousness just as well as their god brothers. He said, so I've made this great innovation. But then he said, just like in Bhagavad Gita, it says that the women can approach the Supreme just as much as the men can. So this is Prabhupada's amazing intelligence, that he knew how to adjust. Yes, the women can go out and preach and engage in Krishna consciousness exactly like the men. But he also basically, he says this is a great change and a great innovation from the older Indian culture or Vedic culture. But at the same time, he's basing it on the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, that the women can approach the Supreme just as much as the men can. So this is Prabhupada's genius. So this is Bhishma Dev's genius. This is why he was qualified to preach to all the sages of the universe, and why he was qualified to be the only one who could pacify the mind of Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira himself is so amazing. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 3 devotees who are mentioned by name and given the title Haridas. Haridas means the servant of Lord Hari. And only 3 personalities in the Bhagavatam are specifically named as Haridas. And one of them is Yudhishthira. The other is Uddhava, who is also described as Haridas. And the third is Govardhan Hill, who is described by Radharani herself as Haridas Savarya, the best of the servants of Lord Hari. So how amazing and how elevated is Yudhishthira? But he feels himself that he needs to hear from a person like Bhishma Dev, who understands all religious principles, know what are principles and what are details, and how to apply everything very perfectly in every situation and with every person. This is the kind of intelligence that Srila Prabhupada had, and this is the kind of intelligence that he expected his disciples to also have and use very cautiously and very intelligently, and guided by scripture and guided by guru and guided by our God brothers and God sisters. How to do this, how to practically apply everything in devotional service in our lives. One final example, Srila Prabhupada mentioned for grihastas, because actually those of us who are grihastas, we're the ones who have, in one sense, the most responsibility, that we have to make adjustments in order to properly practice devotional service within our household, within our life of business and family relationships and social responsibilities. That need for adjustment actually falls very strongly on the grihastas. So Prabhupada said that grihastas have 4 principles that will make their household life perfect. The family worships the deity together. The family honors prasad together, offers and honors prasad together. The family, what was the first one I said? Chanting together, worshiping the deity together, honoring prasad together, and reading scriptures together. So he said these 4 things will transform Griha Medi life into actual spiritual Grihasta life, and will make Grihasta ashram not a burden, but a help in devotional service. So these are the principles he gives these 4 principles. But how we enact them in our particular householder life, those are the details that we need to weigh. How do we engage our children in these things? How much time do we spend on these things? How much weight do we give? One family may do a lot of kirtan together and not as much devotional service. One family may have a very beautiful and opulent devotional service, but maybe not spend as much time reading. So all these four things are there, but different families can adjust them and balance them differently. So this is the responsibility of all devotees, how to practically do it without changing principles and without unnecessarily changing too many things. And things are not very different now from Srila Prabhupada's times. There's not such a giant difference between hippies and hipsters that we need to turn the Krishna consciousness movement upside down or invent a whole new thing. Most of what Prabhupada gave is still perfectly reliable and perfectly valid. And by following him, if we actually follow him and preach like that, we can have success like ISKCON had in its early days, and even greater success than that by following these same principles that Srila Prabhupada gave us, using our intelligence, using our study of Shastra, our practical practice of devotional service, our advice and following of God brothers and God sisters and spiritual master. Then we can also be, to some degree, Kaladesha Vibhagavit, Dharma Gya, Kaladesha Vibhagavit, one who knows the principles of religion, one who knows the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and devotional service, and one who knows how to practically apply it both for himself and also how to inculcate it in all those around him. Hare Krishna, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. If there's any questions or comments or discussion, we can do that now. Yes, Mother Archana Bhakti.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
I appreciate your class very much today. There are several points. First of all, the first point that you made about realizing the knowledge that you acquire from the scripture, that's more important. So I really felt chastised by that, and I appreciated that very much also. But what to do when you don't have realization? At least we do our little bit by repeating, whatever.
Yes, it's a start. And I think everyone who gives class regularly or occasionally will feel this dilemma that you're expressing. That you get up, you're on the chair, on the Vyasasana, and it's your duty. You're speaking the highest philosophy, and it's your duty to. That's what we present when we give class. But we may understand that we may not be actually on that realized platform. So that's part of the growing experience.
Yes, thank you. And the other point is about the 4 items that Srila Prabhupada told for Grihasthas, especially that you have to chant together, eat together, honor prasadam together, and worship the deities together and study the scripture together. I was not aware of this. I only knew the family that prays together, stays together. But this was a detail, and I really appreciate this, and I will try to incorporate it as much as possible.
I don't have the actual reference of Prabhupada saying that handy right now, but I'll try to find that and share it at some future time.
Yeah. This is very practical for us, and I wanted to express my appreciation, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Anything else? Questions, discussion? Nothing else? Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Kaivalya Prabhu.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, just appreciation for your nice class. Actually, it gives a lot of lessons how you can practically act in this with these instructions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
I think these are instructions that we cannot hear too many times. It's never too much. Good for us to repeatedly hear this.
Jai. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Hare Krishna. Any announcements or in preparation for tonight?
Not that I know of. The program is at 4:30 this evening. Please let us all meet.
And class, I think, by His Grace Kaivalya Prabhu. So everyone should attend.
Yes. And then tomorrow morning again, we meet for Bhagavatam class.
Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Bhishma Dev. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.